Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an excellent positional game to share with you. This was played just today, round 3 of the 2025 European Chess Championship. On the white end, Roven Vogel, playing against Jorden Van Foreest. Alright, on board, we have a Slav Defense, and with the move E3, this is the quiet variation. Bishop F5, and now we have this Knight H4, going hunting for a minor piece imbalance. We'll get this exchange in shortly. Follow up Queen B3. Black has an option here. Queen C7 or B6. Chooses C7 in this one. White's quick to now try and get a rook opposite the black queen. There we go. And at this stage, black makes another step here, takes another step with the queen b6 in this position. You do have to respect this move. For instance, if you're just developing the knight, there's a line like this, and there's trouble on this d5 square. Knight takes, queen takes. There you go. We're in a pin here. So black immediately gets off of the c-file. Knight takes bishop, taking towards the center, of course. And from here, a little bit more development, expansion with the doubled pawns, looking forward to exchanging it with g4, or we might view it as clamping down on this potential target here on h2. From here, white goes ahead and initiates this queen capture. Now, what's going to happen shortly after this capture, a couple key pawn moves or captures by black will eventually saddle white with a weak pawn or a weak square. The captures I'm talking about after the queen exchange, black has available a capture on c4 as well as this g4 push. Now, what the computer has its eye on at this point is f3, or to preserve the queens, queen c2. The line I want to draw some attention to, rather than this move in the game, if the game continued with, let's say, f3 and black initiating the capture here on b3, and we get some healthy moves in here, a position like this, you'll notice these captures, well, this capture here on c4 as well as this g4 push would no longer be available to black. We sort of come to a standstill. Pawn advances for black aren't really helping black in any way, pawn advances or captures. But how it plays out in this game after the queen exchange, we do have these helpful pawn moves and captures available to black. So let's see what this looks like after the queen exchange. Only at this point, black plays f3. And now this capture follow-up on c4, very good. This paves the way for some expansion here with the other doubled pawn. Also, notice the bishop has been pulled away from e2, pulled away from its defensive g4. This will help black to undouble the g pawn. There's something that sticks out to me about this position. It's sort of a battle between white having the bishop pair and black having very active rooks. The black rooks didn't even have to move in order to be super active. That's the thing that sticks out to me most here. And I believe between these two features in the position, the rook activity is really the great positive. I prefer to have the rook activity here. Now, white's response to b5, you don't really have a great option. If you return to e2 here in the game, it's bishop b3. But if you return to e2, trying to hold up this g4 break, there's going to be an issue on a2. The knight could be kicked, and then there you go, the a pawn will fall. So this bishop sticks around. It's a reliable defender of a2. Now comes g4. And now what do you do as white? The f-pawn pretty much wants to stay exactly where it is. Capturing or pushing will concede control over this important e4 square. You could see some lines, let's say if f4 is played, not saying right away, but at some stage this knight could maybe be given a shove. Maybe the knight could hop into e4. Probably not a good idea to weaken that e4 square. So this pawn sits. Follow up king to e2. We get b4, knight d1. Why is the knight going in reverse? Well, it has this idea to eventually babysit a soon-to-be weak white pawn. There's going to be an isolated h-pawn shortly. So let's see what this looks like. We get the exchange on f3. White recaptures with the pawn, taming the knight. No hole on e4, but there's a target now in h2. Rook lift. Rook a5 to h5. There we go. A target has been created with these key pawn breaks. First, the capture on c4, then the follow-up g4. There's a target. Now there's pressure on it. What's the knight doing exactly from f2? Well, after h3, it has this responsibility. Pretty convenient defense, it seems. All right, let's get a few more healthy moves in here, improving the pieces. And from here, we see a knight improvement. White at this stage plays knight d3. You could play with e4 here, but there is a target created here on d4. It's unprotected. Black could consider a maneuver like this to put some pressure on white's center. No e4 here. Instead, it's knight to d3. Now, what's going to happen shortly? This knight has left defensive h3. What's going to happen shortly? We're going to exchange these two pawns right here. Who's going to emerge the better side after these exchanges? Black by just a little bit. It's tough to say which of these pawns is more valuable. They're both, not the greatest. We're looking at an isolated pawn for white and one of black's doubled pawns that's being exchanged. Let's see what this looks like. It may be better in the end after the smoke clears here and the knight is kicked away from its defensive b4. After the smoke clears and we've exchanged these pawns, what's maybe the thing to focus on? This is the piece that really grabs my attention. It's a very active rook. It's a best piece in the position, in my opinion. It's functioning like a rook. Also, if you look at its counterpart, very passive white rook. So black is just a hair better right around here. And on top of that, it also feels like it's just a much easier position to play. Even though also there isn't a queen on board, the king may not feel so comfortable. These knights are just a moment away from connecting with this rook. So let's see what this looks like. We get, from this point, e5, a nice pawn break, addressing the duo. The capture on e5. And there we go. The knight coordinating here with a very active rook. How to respond to this pressure here on f3? This is where white now goes wrong. After just this little bit of pressure now on f3, ends up playing f4 here. Now, hard to blame white for going wrong at this point. You pretty much have to play like a computer, I would say, if you're going to pull off the top move. This here's the top move. Wants to play knight c2. Being prepared to meet knight takes f3 with rook f2. Some rook activity, some coordination here on f7. In the event of knight e5, there's bishop f4. That's what the computer has its eye on. Pitching that pawn, looking to coordinate with this unopposed light square bishop. But how white plays it, he gives this knight here a shove. But here's the thing, the knight doesn't have to move. Top response now, move in the game. Bishop captures knight. This knight here does not have to hit the reverse button. we're swiping a key defender of d3, and this knight is ready to pounce. We might say that this f4 move has extended the scope of the very active rook. New intersection square available now to black on d3. This capture on b4, we're removing a defender of that square. White simply recaptures here. Computer says best is to take on e5 and allow this position here not at all comfortable. We're still looking at -1 eval. Very ugly pawns here. Simple improvements. One of these pawns are bound to fall. Also, there's a passer in the position here for black, the g6 pawn. So not at all appealing taking on a double isolated pawn structure. How white plays it, he recaptures here on b4, and now the knight pounces. Big fork here. Some material will now be won. This is the big threat, winning the pawn with a fork. So that's covered. And now the other knight enters. It's already very difficult to work around this knight right here, an octopus knight. Look at all the squares it covers. And another knight is ready to join it. This would be a lot of ground for 6 points of material to cover. What are you even supposed to do? Where's a safe square when you have 2 octopus knights in the position? Forget about it. There's no safe square. So this is a disaster now for Team White. It crumbles very fast. Down for the count, the B pawn. There's no fear of this knight being trapped. Let's say king here. The king has a responsibility. Bishop will fall. I'm pointing out king b1 because of this attack here. Not available. So the try from here is with f5, a knight check. We're picking up now a second pawn with check and simplifying this position here, removing this potentially dangerous passed pawn. Let's get rid of it. White gets the piece back. And from here we have knight g3. White is up, or excuse me, black is up 2 big pawns, passers. So let's see the technique from this point. King c1, king f8, king d2, rook f3. This is maybe the last moment, the last little test in this ending. What move to play here exactly? I'll throw this one to you as a pop quiz. What would be your move here? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, there's only one winning move, and it is played. Knight to e4 check is it. Now, another move that may be appealing is rook a3. Still keeping the knight defended. You put pressure on the pawn, but I imagine a move like this is quickly discarded by Van Foreest because you recognize after bishop b3 your rook is pretty much out of play. And it's cut off from its defense of the knight, and you have some issues on this g file here, the knight and pawn. It does carry out a little bit more. It's kind of an interesting line here. If the pawn steps up, there's rook g4. Eventually that pawn will be won. And if the king steps over, we could see a position like this where the king comes over, targets the rook, defends the pawn, and this frees up the bishop to bother this loose knight. Calls this holdable here for white. You really don't have to think that deeply, though. You just have to recognize that rook a3 here, bishop b3, unnecessary to have your rook cut off like that. So the way forward, the only winning path is with knight e4 check. White's response is king c1. If you play to, let's say, c2, this would allow rook exchange, and that'll be a 1 minor piece ending, being up the 2 passed pawns. And if the king steps over in this direction, you could continue with rook g3, and you're holding on to the pawn, and you could slowly improve from there. So the try here, king hides behind the bishop, but now that bishop is thrown into a pin. And there really isn't a great way out. If you get out of the pin, we're going to get a rook exchange. Right around the corner, there's knight f2, knight c3, hammering away at the pinned piece. That's how it plays out in the game. The try from here is rook takes pawn. In comes knight c3. And you have to babysit the bishop. There we go with rook to d3, or rook d6. While white is in this restricted state, very healthy to improve the king, bother the rook. This is the direction the king wants to go anyway. And now we simply simplify into a winning king and pawn ending. And this one only goes as far as this point right here after c5. White simply resigns. Now, if the game continued from here, just putting on some moves, what I want to point out is that in this ending, if the pawn takes a step up from the a2 square, it'll eventually be 1. So, for instance, like this, eventually this pawn will be tracked. And the game could also end in a pretty interesting way if the pawn stays right where it's at. If we just play out this king and pawn ending, we could get to a position like this where we stalemate the king only, and then we end up winning with this fancy maneuver. We slip right by and have a position where white is able to queen, but we deliver mate next with the pawn. All right, at this level, players know exactly how it's going to play out, so probably the perfect moment to go ahead and resign right here after the move c5. Anyhow, nice positional game here out of the quiet Slav. What are your thoughts with this one? Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.